going to talk about what's at stake in classical music, especially the tonal system and the classical music of the 18th and 19th centuries. And this is kind of in distinction to my last post, which was about non-tonal music, or like specifically music that uses just intonation, which I identify with the ascetic cardinal. And so the tonal system I associate with the cathartic cardinal and reason generally, which really has a different sort of logic of becoming from the aesthetic, in that it's less mystical in a way, though it has a mysticism of its own. That mysticism, I guess, has more of a direction, and it has more of a self-negating, self-refining quality. So first I'll just talk about the context of classical music and the tonal system. For those who don't know, Bach, so there's a collection of keyboard pieces called the Well-Tempered Clavier, which was written by Bach, and it's famous, it's sometime in the 1600s, it's famous for being maybe the first really iconic demonstration of a kind of full exploration of the tonal system, which made use of well temperament or equal temperament. Those might not be exactly the same thing actually, but they're pretty close. And the basic idea is that you construct your musical system using 12 semitones, and so every two of those counts as a tone, and you use 7 tones per like mode that you're in, or the point here is that each semitone is exactly the same distance apart in terms of perceived pitch. And to do this, you have to distort the results you get if you generate pitches by multiplying frequencies. And that's more natural because think about a vibrating string, like a string. Let's say there's an instrument that's like this long, and there's a string that's this long. To get an octave up, if you have a wavelength that's like this, you double the size of it, so 2 is now 4, and then that's an octave up. So like, or at least that's the next overtone. This can be perceived as an octave if that was the fundamental. Sorry, I'm kind of being a bit too all over the place in this, or too like technical or whatever, but so the basic idea is that if you don't use equal temperament tuning, then like if you start your scale on a different note, even if you play what is in theory the exact same 7 pitches, the keys all sound different from one another. Because like if you play, say C major, each interval that are officially like one note apart, there are slight differences in what really that note is. It's like pretty close to one, but it's like slightly different. So if you transpose that up to like F or G, even if it's F major or G major, you'll get a different experience. Kind of slightly, but like pretty significantly, actually. So like Indian classical music really makes use of that. Like they're like in Indian classical music, you actually really savor the differences between different keys, and they almost like produce a different mode just by being in a different place. But for well-tempered music, the advantage is that you can go from C major, and if you want to do D major, you change the pitch of one note, and you have something that in principle is identical to what you had in C major, except it's starting on a different note. And what that opens up is the possibility of modulating between keys. And this is such a huge part of Western classical music, is like having a system of rules that you sort of have to obey when you're in a particular key, and then tracing a journey to get from that key while still mostly obeying those rules, and then arriving at a different key. And so really, like every other kind of music, that there is, like, does not really have an equivalent of this. It sort of turns the composition into this like journey where like you're not just in a key, you're not just in a mode. You fundamentally you are, but then you can have a whole section of the piece. Like maybe the piece is in C, but then there's a section that's in like I don't know, like A flat minor or something, and you've sort of played a series of chess moves to somehow kind of get there, and then that whole region is like this like other part of the journey, and eventually you return back to C, and there's this kind of like this like journey-like tension that's possible in doing that. There were a lot of tropes from this that people are really familiar with, I guess, especially from like soundtracks. But there's a logic to it, and this is all very connected to like the Industrial Revolution. Like people think of classical music as old, but it's really not. It's really not old at all. I mean, it's old compared to rock music, I guess, but like it's it's music that took place after the scientific revolution, and you can kind of compare it very usefully to like train schedules and stuff, or like this kind of like sacrifice of something that was kind of nice about nature but wasn't as efficient, and sort of like forcing this system that kind of sours everything in a way, but then it's like more like powerful or like more useful. Like mass-produced clothing, for example, is kind of similar to that. And so the history of classical music is traceable through something that opens up, which is chromaticism. And so from say Wagner to Mozart to Bach, from Bach to Mozart to Beethoven to Wagner, and then once we get into atonal music with Schoenberg, the idea is that the driving force of the development of classical music is chromaticism, which is like ways to kind of break rules and make the music more dissonant in ways that really wouldn't have been possible if those rules hadn't been there because of the tonal system. And there's something really kind of wild in sort of understanding or just experiencing how the tonal system was sort of the seed of its own destruction, and how it kind of like exploded into the atonal music of Schopenhauer, of Schoenberg and Webern and Berg, the so-called Second Vienna School, and how like that, the sort of dissonant like derangement of sort of all that music doesn't really make any sense as dissonance even without being compared to this system that it's like using but kind of diverging from. And there's something to that in metal as well, like in the tonal system, the augmented fourth is a very ugly tone. It's a very ugly interval. In just intonation, a fourth, like a fourth, there's kind of like a sharp fourth that's kind of not quite augmented. It's like the most beautiful thing. Like, like it's kind of, it just sounds like the cosmic hum or something. And in the tonal system, it's like the thing, it's like the most dissonant possible sound, and that's what the song Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath repeats over and over again, is that augmented fourth interval. So it's like, both atonal modernist classical music and metal react against this tonal system. In the case of modernist classical music, the aim is not really to tear things down, but to push forward, because there's this sense that somehow what's going on here is an expansion of the human capacity to perceive and understand, and that's so much of what rationalism is, this kind of self-undermining quest, or self-criticizing quest to use criticism to arrive somewhere and then look back and then realize that something wasn't essential, and there's in theory that this is a kind of religion, that like there's a hope that is going in a positive direction, and there's a faith in that, and so yeah, I mean in these videos, I'm not really, in this whole system, I'm not judging one mode of faith against others. I'm just sort of enumerating them, so like the cosmic sound current stuff doesn't really have that like progress angle. It's a very different kind of faith, and this is a kind of faith as well, but it's a rationalist faith, and there's it's also a humanist faith. Like, this is the thing, is that it's very human. Like, there's nothing quite like the emotion that comes from 19th century classical music, at least in my opinion. And so much of what I'm interested in doing in liturgies music is synthesizing that kind of cosmic sensibility with the kind of like journey that sort of makes you want to weep or just kind of feel fulfilled in a kind of, you know, triumph and suffering and so forth. And then also, of course, the actual rock music stuff, which is a whole different aspect of music that I'll get to. So, yeah, I don't know. There's some thoughts about classical music.